Now, India's Supreme Court has given the government 4 weeks to respond to more than 100 legal challenges to its new citizenship law. The Citizenship Amendment Act sparked weeks of protests across the country. It gives persecuted minorities from 3 neighbouring countries the right to apply for citizenship, but excludes Muslims. Critics say the legislation is discriminatory and petitions were filed challenging its constitutional validity. Well, our correspondent Elizabeth Puranam joins us now live from New Delhi. Liz, talk us through what's been happening in the courtroom today.
Nastasia, after 6 weeks of protests since the Citizenship Amendment Act was passed, the Supreme Court finally began to hear the petitions against the law. There were more than 140 petitions filed by all sorts of groups, civil society, human rights organizations, political parties, including the main opposition Congress and the Indian Union Muslim League. And we are joined now by the president of the Indian Union Muslim League, Mr. K.M. Kadir Mohideen. Mr. Mohideen, thank you for taking time to talk to us on Al Jazeera. So firstly, why did your group file a petition against the law at the Supreme Court?
The Citizenship Amendment Act passed by the Parliament of India goes against the very spirit and letter of the Indian Constitution. Indian Constitution upholds secular principles of our country. But the act passed by the Parliament goes against the very secular principle. Once our President of India, Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan said, in secular India, there can't be any discriminatory legislation. But it is a discriminatory legislation. And only 3 countries, Muslim countries are named, and Muslims are excluded. 6 other communities are included. This kind of discriminatory legislation cannot be passed in the Parliament. Therefore, the very bill passed by the Parliament, which now has become an act, is quite contradictory to the very principle of the Constitution. It goes against the very spirit and letter of the Constitution. It should be nullified as unconstitutional. That's why we, Indian Muslim League, has filed a case against the act against the Supreme Court.
And how hopeful are you that the petition will get a fair hearing at the Supreme Court again, given that it was passed by both houses of Parliament, by a government that has such a strong mandate, a majority in this country right now?
The Parliament bill was passed not with a thumping majority, but they have secured only 37% of the people's vote. 63% of the peoples of India had voted against the government. Therefore, we can't say it is the will of the majority people of India. Then the bill passed in the Parliament with their brutal majority, they say. But this bill has become now argued before the Honorable Supreme Court. We were observing the way in which the Supreme Court has reacted. That is quite sympathetic. The Supreme Court's reaction was quite sympathetic. We feel and believe also that it may go to be a positive also. They have openly said within 4 weeks' time, the government of India should give all the answers to the petitions, and within the 4 weeks' time, the Supreme Court will give some sort of verdict, either constituting Constitution bench to hear the bill, to hear the case on a day-to-day basis or something like that, or some other relief also they may produce after 4 weeks' time. That is our belief.
Thank you very much for your time. So that is the president of the Indian Union Muslim League, one of the parties that have filed the petitions, and the government now has 4 weeks, and with that time given to the government, the protests that we've seen around the country are set to continue against the citizenship law.
And that's a situation we'll continue watching very closely. Elizabeth Puranam there for us in New Delhi. Thank you, Liz.